Welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast, where we deep dive into the best matches in AEW history. Brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network and your host, Sam Brown. Yes, hello and welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sam Brown. Thank you for joining me. Every week, alongside a special guest, I take an in-depth look at one of the best matches in AEW history, taken from the definitive AEW Match Guide, as ranked by over 30 wrestling commentators from around the internet wrestling community. If you enjoy the show today, you can subscribe and rate it on the podcast app of your choice, and make sure you check out all the other great shows on the Social Suplex Podcast Network that cover all aspects of the world of pro wrestling. My guest for today, he is simply one of my favourite people to chat about wrestling with. It's Mr. Howard Shilling, and we're digging into Cody Rhodes versus MJF from Revolution 2020. Howard, welcome to the show. How are you going today?
Fantastic, Sam. Thanks for having me on, and thanks to everyone who contributed to the list and everything like that. It was a phenomenal undertaking, and I'm just glad to be part of it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, shout outs to all the people who contributed to the definitive match guide. If you haven't read it, the link is in the description for the podcast and in the notes for the podcast, and you can find it on Wrestling Headlines. Worth a read. There's lots of really great insight there. And this, of course, this match came from that, as all the matches that we dig into here on the podcast do. Howard, as I ask everyone on the podcast, how did you get into AEW?
So I got into AEW just because, well, I've been a wrestling fan most of my life and everything like that. I followed WCW, I followed WWE, and I still do to some extent, as well as New Japan Pro Wrestling. But I needed kind of something new. AEW had a lot of great build behind it, but you can have the best build in the world. You got to be able to put on product that delivers and captivates an audience. And so far, AEW's really done that. I mean, the fact that you were able to get 50 really great matches for this guide is kind of a testament to that. I know you probably, if you wanted to, could have extended that list to 100 and still come up with a lot of really great matches. I know there were probably a lot of big honorable mentions. So AEW right now, they're not perfect as a wrestling company, but they just turn out overall really solid work, and I'm excited to see not only, what they've done the past 2 years, but where they go in the future. And this match, Cody versus MJF, certainly one of the landmark matches. Not surprised to see it made the list.
Absolutely. And I think it will, as we'll dig into and everything, I think this one will only become more and more important as time progresses. And as we see MJF just continue to on his trajectory onwards and upwards, wherever he may end up, I think it's pretty obvious that he's going to end up somewhere pretty special when it's all said and done for him in, who knows how many years' time. As you said, we are talking about Cody Rhodes versus MJF from Revolution 2020. To introduce the match, as we always do, we give it its flowers. Big Papa Dave, he gave it 3.5 stars. Cage Match currently rated at 6.76. Tough markers there at Cage Match, I've got to say. And in the definitive match guide that we did earlier in the year, or early last year, actually, it's really that change of years really catches up with you. It came in 39th out of the 50 matches that ended up ranking on there. Of course, as Howard said, a big tail of honorable mentions, but that's where it came in. In terms of this match itself, I think we really do need to dig into the build. On the definitive match guide, everyone who wrote and voted for this one and wrote about it mentioned the build. So we really do have to dig into this. And this one really goes back a long way for AEW. Goes all the way back to All Out, where Cody made a captain's pick when they were laying out the card for the show. And I don't know how real or in kayfabe that was, but the idea was that Cody saw this tape by MJF and he made him this person that he picked to be in All Out, and that sort of set up their relationship. And of course, MJF took that with two hands. At All Out, he was in the first match that was on the actual pay-per-view section of that card, and he immediately made an impact. He set up his character. He went on about marketing himself, and if AEW had never happened, he still had used that all-out appearance to great effect. Howard, what were some of your first impressions of MJF when he popped up?
Well, I actually started looking at MJF back when he was working for Major League Wrestling as part of the Dynasty with Alex Hammerstone. And
was that before All Out, or was that after All Out? I don't know.
A little bit before, and sorry for him, but a little bit during. Yep. I know that he kind of signed an exclusive deal with AEW, or is that exclusive as they can get. MJF's persona that he's shown in AEW is kind of like his. He was the leader of the Dynasty and everything like that. That's where he came up with his catchphrase, "I'm better than you, and you know it." And it's a more fleshed out version. Honestly, if you get the chance, kind of take a look at his old stuff there, and then it's amplified, and he's done such great work. And you look, I know we're going to get into this a little bit later, but his first two major feuds have been with two of the best storytellers in arguably in the recent business, in Cody Rhodes and most recently kind of Chris Jericho. And I know we'll get
and just throw John Moxley in the middle there just to round it out. No schlub himself.
Just randomly that little, we deserve better mini feud with Moxley. No, that wasn't a star-making performance at all for him. That wasn't a proving ground at all, But it's awesome to kind of see where he's evolved from this great, because MLW is a great company in general, but to see him kind of just take that and take the rocket and run with it, it's been absolutely phenomenal. I think he's only and he's really young too. Like you say, he's kind of been bred for greatness. He's only like 25, I think. And as we'll kind of get into more probably as this goes on, the fact that he's this good, this young, and he seems to get it, it can only speak well for his trajectory, hopefully, in the business. Like, he's the heel that everyone, I think, loves to hate. Like, I know he really plays into that with like how he stays in character so much online and in person, but in a way that sort of plays with the fans. It's not a mean-spirited way, he's not, he's doing it in a way that the fans love to get involved in and get invested in, which is really good. That was there from the start. Like, he was doing that blending of reality and kayfabe so early on, and he deserves immense credit for how he's found this character, and he's finessed it and changed a little bit, but the bare bones were there from the start in All Out. And he has really brought that in a way that fans have engaged with and emotionally invested in, even if it's emotionally investing in wanting to see him get his face punched in. And of course, the other side of this match from MJF is Cody, who, of course, is one of the founders of AEW, one of the EVPs, positioned as the figurehead of the company early on. Early on, he had MJF beside him as his sort of best friend or protege. They sort of fleshed out that relationship, particularly on BTE, how MJF would act like a jerk to everyone else, and then to Cody's face, he would act very differently when Cody was around. And it sort of came out, though, and I liked this, it came out that Cody sort of understood what this was like. There was a very interesting segment where I think him, MJF, and Brandy were having dinner, and MJF and Brandy ended up just like swearing up a storm with just like some really brutal insults at each other. And Cody heard some of it, and, Cody sort of twigged onto this, but still thought, even though MJF wasn't the greatest dude, he saw a bit of himself in MJF, I think, and still saw MJF as someone he wanted to mentor, particularly as Dynamite kicked off. And, he had MJF in his corner at All Out when it was the match against Shawn Spears, and in the feud with Jericho, MJF was constantly by his side. It was, MJF gave him the scarf to punch through the glass in that build-up. I thought it was a really interesting character dynamic, having, the guy who was the lead face with a guy that everyone knows is at some point going to be just this absolutely, completely dislikable villain in the initial positioning of their characters. Oh, definitely. And you brought up a great point there. I think every person watching the show knew that as soon as MJF started coming into the Nightmare family, that he was eventually going to turn. But credit to AEW, they didn't do it immediately. They let it breathe. And that is one thing I love about AEW. They're good storytellers. I mean, take a look at who you have. You have Cody Rhodes. The cliche gets beaten down into the dirt to death, but he is the son of one of the best storytellers from the 1980s NWA, Dusty Rhodes. The dude could put together a compelling story in his sleep. And Cody and Dustin are much the same way. They let this go. Like you said, the scarf and the infamous Dippin' Dots segment. And then they tease it and they tease it. And then you get to that world title match, which ironically Chris Jericho is part of. And then he finally turns. And they told enough of a story to where most people I want to think had stopped going, you know what? MJF's going to be face for a while. We can go with this. And then he turns. And I think everyone was like, we saw it coming, but how did we not see it coming? They did it so perfectly.
Yeah.
And then you get to the actual build for this match, which is almost a different segment entirely. I mean, this was so well done.
I will woo you up there a little bit. You're getting a little bit of a head.
Sorry.
You're getting excited there, Hal.
Sorry.
I really like how that, as you said, everyone knew what was going to happen at some point. And I like that so often you see face characters when they're around a heel, they're idiots basically. And it would have been easy for Cody to be completely oblivious to this, but they didn't do that. And Cody gets flack for talking about how he doesn't believe in heels and faces. But and I think to some degree, like I also like to lean into the idea that it can be more complex than that. And this is a good example of what I'd call like three-dimensional characters. You know, Cody is the top face and he sees himself in this character and he believes that he can make a difference in this character's life and he can see the potential. So he wants to be around it, wants to mentor it, wants to nurture it. Of course, as you said, that all kind of blew up in his face when he did turn on Cody at Full Gear. In the World Championship match, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Cody had said he would never challenge for the title again if he lost. And MJF essentially, even though you could argue Cody was probably never going to win, as sort of Ms. Fan and I did back in the very first episode of this series, when talking about this match, you know, we don't think he was ever actually going to win this from the point that he dove over those ropes. But it still doesn't matter that the power of that was taken out of his hands by MJF throwing in the towel and then giving him one of the big ones in the nuts, a kick to the nuts afterwards to solidify the fact that this partnership was over. And one of the interesting things that happened at this point was they didn't immediately interact with each other. MJF sort of took a break from Cody and didn't acknowledge Cody at first. They had a segment with Chris Jericho where they talked about both disliking Cody Rhodes. But after that, MJF went on to go into this tournament for the Dynamite Diamond Ring, which he won. And Cody was sort of left in limbo a little bit. This is a kind of a weird moment in their program. What did you think of this sort of little moment here before we get into, you know, once things hit, and once things hit, they really hit. But what did you think of this sort of break that they had in between?
I actually kind of liked it. You know, as wrestling fans, pretty much after you've been watching the product for even a month, 2 months, 3 months, you're almost sort of conditioned to, okay, this is plot point A, we're going to immediately move into plot point B, then plot point C, and so on and so on and so forth. And AEW has done, you know, they don't do it all the time, but every once in a while they'll almost subvert expectations, and when they get it right, daggum, do they get it right.
Yeah.
I think everyone was looking for Cody to come out for blood and MJF to, you know, come right, which if you look at MJF's character, that's not what's going to happen. But you expected them to interact on Dynamite following Full Gear. And the fact that they kept them away is a testament to how well and how much restraint that they had for this, and I honestly applaud them because, the Dynamite Diamond ring, I still don't understand its function. I think it's probably more of a MacGuffin or red herring than anything else, because MJF's had that for like 2 years now.
Yeah, well, it's something MJF can use to cheat, really. That's kind of what it's become.
I mean, realistically, I think it might have been something for a special prop for him. And if you take a look at it, you can almost draw very, very loose parallels between the Dynamite Diamond ring of MJF and Cody's run with the ROH World title, how he made an actual ring of honor, and he was telling people, to kiss the ring. And, you see MJF's mannerisms when he has the Dynamite Diamond ring on. He's almost holding it up in front of your face to go, come on, kiss the ring almost.
And he does kiss it. He kisses it himself too.
Exactly. So that's another, I think it may be completely coincidental, and if it's not, props to them. But it's another added layer of character because MJF already has these amazing physical and psychological attributes. Yep. You're just giving him another tool, which But
I think it was a bit, probably realistically, it was probably a nice blend of where, like, practically they didn't want to go straight into the feud because they had this match penciled for the pay-per-view Revolution, but that's not till the end of February, and they didn't want to stretch it too far. And that's like the practical aspect, but they still managed to weave like the character into it, where like MJF with his character, he doesn't want to get into the ring with this frothing at the mouth, coming for blood Cody Rhodes that, he knows is going to be gunning for his head, and he knows that in many ways that he's outmatched with at this point. And that's where we come to why he put these stipulations in place, which we'll get into. As a character, he actually knows himself very well, and he knows that he is outmatched when it comes to Cody Rhodes, which leads to the stipulations that he puts in place when he does win that, and when Cody eventually talks himself into this confrontation. MJF says, "I'll do it, but before we do it, you have to agree to a number of things. Firstly, you can't touch me before we get to our match. Secondly, you have to beat Wardlow in a steel cage match. And thirdly, you have to get down on your knees and let me give you 10 lashes." And once this program hit, man, at this moment, I still think this is one of the absolute pinnacles for AEW when this was hitting, and the program with Jon Moxley and Chris Jericho was hitting, and the program with Kenny Omega and Hangman Page and the Bucks was hitting. This is like some of the best TV that AEW has ever put together. And this particular part is a huge part of it, particularly, and I want to get to the lashes segment. Because I feel like my question to you, I guess, is this the best segment of TV that AEW has produced? That's how highly I think of this particular one. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I want to ask the question to you, Howard.
Well, first of all, like I said, nice choice using the pinnacle there, considering MJF's current,
completely unintended, but I'll take it.
Like you said, the build for this, the trials of Cody, and I know I kind of alluded to this earlier, but with Cody MJF working with Cody and then Chris Jericho, you can almost look at the trials of Cody as almost like an early prototype for MJF's later feud with Chris Jericho, how he had the labors of Jericho. And he did this in such like a Machiavellian way to where, okay, I know that you would love nothing more than to rip my head off. So the one thing, my first thing, you can't touch me. And that plays such an integral role in the Lashes segment. But then the steel cage match with Wardlow, it tripled down in terms of its importance. Not only is it a trial of Cody, it's also the first cage match in AEW history. And oh, by the way, it's the debut match for Wardlow, who at this point becomes MJF's heavy. No pressure at all. No, none at all here. But the Lashes segment. So
yeah, there's just like so much grit and fire and heart and passion from Cody, and as like the way that they produced it with as the lashes happen first, Dustin comes out, then the Bucks come out, the heels come out as well to kind of observe and watch Cody get his licks. And then, of course, as Cody looks like he's just about to break, Brandy comes down as well to give him that energy and give him that motivation to go on and take these lashes that are being dealt out. Everyone loves the character in this. They love the fire, how dramatically they drew it out, how MJF and how Wardlow did it. And I as well just love the subtext of it, with like the whole point is MJF, but his primary goal is to make Cody Rhodes quit. He wants Cody Rhodes to not take the lashes, so then he doesn't have to go against him in this match. And then having not taken the lashes, if he's going to take the lashes, then B, he wants to injure him as much as possible, because MJF, as I said, he knows who he is. He knows that he wants to win, but he knows that if it's a fair fight, he is outgunned and he's outmatched. So he has to do these things. He has to put these stipulations in place so that he has some sort of an advantage going into it to even the playing field. But man, like the fire and the heart in this segment is just incredible, and the way the crowd gets into it. It's something else, man.
It definitely is. And a third factor, and they play into this, and by the way, I'll answer the question that you asked, kind of where this ranks in terms of segments in North American wrestling. If it's not the best, it's top 3 or even
right
top 5. This segment is Cody's magnum opus in terms of anyone who wants to say, oh, he's not good at telling stories. If you're out there, you're entitled to your opinion. I think it's the best segment in AEW history. And like you'd mentioned earlier, this was such a stacked time in order to be able to stand out, going into Revolution, which might be AEW's best pay-per-view. I think I'm not going out on a limb and saying that. But there's also a third thing that MJF wants to do. He either wants to get him to quit, he either wants him not to take the lashes, but also they mention it like 5 or 6 times. He wants to piss Cody off so badly that Cody breaks that first trial.
Yep.
He mentions over and over again, hit me.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Hit me. The amount of face-to-face stare downs, nose to nose, to where you could barely fit a slip of paper between their noses, so they're not actually touching. And then, like you said, during the segment, they space everything out perfectly. You have Arn Anderson come down. You have the Young Bucks, who I think this is one of their only interactions with Cody, an acknowledgement that they're friends kind of in canon or on screen.
Certainly, they brawled a lot with when the Inner Circle was happening, when that stuff was going on. But this is certainly one of the last times, I think, that they've done that. That there's been like some sort of acknowledgement of their friendship, their previous union, depending how much you know what the dirt sheets say is true about this relationship.
But the one that sticks out to me, and I've watched this particular part of the segment God knows how many times, but the final lash, I don't know whether it was intentional or not. But if you look at it closely, that final lash isn't, of course, it's not on Cody's back, but it hits Cody in his dream tattoo on his chest. And I will go to the end of my days wanting to know if that was intentional or whether it was just one of the luckiest coincidences in wrestling history, because you're already feeling for Cody. Yep. Like, this is, early days of AEW where Cody is the hero and everything like that. He's the bright, shining light.
Yep.
And not only is he doing something that wouldn't necessarily be out of place in 1980s NWA, early days.
So much grit. Like,
old school Southern wrestling, I think, is the term.
It's like straight out of Mid-South.
Exactly. But that final lash to the dream tattoo right over his heart, and it sends everyone scurrying in. It's just chef's kiss. It's one of the most perfect capstones to an already phenomenal segment that they haven't really topped. And that's saying
something, because the only other things I can think of just off the top of my head is the John Moxley Eddie Kingston face-to-face before Full Gear 2020, the CM Punk debut because of just how insane it was, and possibly the Eddie Kingston CM Punk promo segment, which was quite recent. I don't know where I'd rank them. They're the three that immediately pop out to mind in terms of legendary segments they've had. The last thing I'll add about this before we kind of move on to the actual match itself, half hour in, we're finally getting to the match, is I love that MJF leaves. When MJF leaves, he's like more pissed off than before he delivered those lashes. You'd think those lashes would make him happy, but they didn't, because he didn't achieve his goal. He didn't get Cody to quit. He didn't get Cody to take a swing at him. So he's one step further into getting into this match that he doesn't actually want to be a part of. And of course, as we said, there's the cage match with Wardlow. I don't want to get into that match because that was actually another match that made this list. So at some point someone down the line, I'll be doing a more deep dive into that one, other than to say it was excellent, as we've both said. And also note that Cody, in the end, broke his toe when he moonsaulted off the top of the cage to get the final pinfall, which is something that will play into the actual match itself between the two of them. Did you have anything quick just to talk about with the cage match without, going too in depth?
No, the only thing I can say, really, they set the bar high, and I think they at least met it. Yep. I can't wait to hear the podcast when you talk about that particular match. I'm sure it's going to be a great one.
Yeah.
And
not scheduled yet, but I'm sure it'll pop up with someone at some point, because it was a really good match and something that's a bit of a landmark for the company itself as well. Anyway, getting to this match itself at Revolution 2020, the first of the Revolutions. This match went on second last, which is pretty heady billing. They've had big matches in that position pretty much exclusively. So, it talks to how much they were promoting this match, how big of a star Cody was at the time, and how much of a big deal he was in the company at the time, and also, what they thought of MJF as well. Of course, the entrances, MJF gets giant boos, and there's, a little touch that I liked was the Burberry trim that sort of went down the main screen and then down the LED board they had on the entrance ramp. I love this Revolution setup, and they've kind of did it again at the Arthur Ashe. It looks like it's a little bit slippery, so it doesn't work so well with people running on it, but I don't know, it's something that's a nice touch for pay-per-views that I hope they keep going back to every now and again. Mm-hmm. And Cody, of course. Cody gets the entrance of all entrances here. Firstly, he's walking from the back. He's walking from the back as he did it All Out when he went into that NWA match. Then he comes out and he's getting sung to the ring by Downstate. But amongst it all, people sort of noticed that there was something a bit funny with Cody Rhodes' neck. And then, of course, it was revealed that he had got the Nightmare tattoo on his neck, the Nightmare Family tattoo logo on his neck. What did you think of his entrance, Howard?
I'm so glad you brought that up. Because
as someone else put it, who's a bit funnier and a bit smarter than me, he got a neck tattoo on his chest and a chest tattoo on his neck.
Exactly. But I love how one of the more ostentatious heels that we had on that show, and were a lot of ostentatious heels, actually had the more muted entrance. Yeah. Meanwhile, Big Face gets a, double or nothing-esque entrance. The segment's 34 minutes. The first 8 minutes of it are entrances, and the first 6 of that are Cody's entrance. Yeah. Come on. And, of course, he gets all of the pyro. I don't know what their pyro budget is in AEW, but Cody just takes a look at it and goes, mine.
In his contract, he's got a percentage note of what the budget is, and that's
got to be it. But also at the same time, kidding aside, it sets up everything. It gives further credence that this is a big match. You want to pay attention to this match. And AEW, for the most part, does that in spades. The matches that are important, they give that big match feel. Yep. Like you said, the Burberry trim entrance ramp for MJF, that subtlety and everything like that for him. Because, at the end of the day, MJF, he's not really flashy. I want to say kind of like Chris Jericho back in his No Country for Old Men phase. He's got the cool confidence about him. He's not going to do all these random, things just because he can do it. He's not going to fit every heel trope in. But at the same time, it's subtle. He's got his 300-pound, Mount Everest in Wardlow.
Yeah.
He's got the Burberry scarf. He's got the subtle music that just lets you know I'm an, pardon the pun, elite competitor. You all need to be envious of me, and that's all you need to know, and I'll do my talking kind of in the ring.
He's not quite as... That's an interesting comparison you make to Chris Jericho's, like, 2008, 2009 character. I wouldn't say he's as, like, completely muted and like serial killer Stone Cold-esque as... not Stone Cold Steve Austin. Like, you know what I'm saying? He's not necessarily like the Gorgeous George school of heel where it's, like everything is turned up to 11, like the Shawn Michaels 90s pretty boy deal. It's not quite that either. It's sort of somewhere in between that. I didn't love I don't think Downstate covered themselves with glory in their performance here, but it still puts it over as what it does do for me is it puts over how important this is for Cody. He has got this massive entrance because to him this is a giant deal. This is a guy that stole his chance to be world champion ever in this company that he created and this company that he loves. So for him, this is, and also personally betrayed him. So this is something that, is really important to him. And that plays into it because as soon as the bell rings, Cody just absolutely goes for MJF's head. He's going after him really hard. The crowd's chanting, fuck him up, Cody, fuck him up. They've bought into this. And when they actually do come to blows, Cody gets the best of the two opening exchanges that they have, so much so that MJF just rolls out of the ring and, sort of starts jaw-jacking with the crowds, throws a beer can, calls a fan a coward. It's an interesting trope that's of the heel early on just getting out of the ring and completely trying to neuter the baby faces, the faces or the heroes fire early on. What do you think of it in terms of a way to set up a match?
It's a unique tactic, but once again, it's one that fits with MJF. I know we're gonna beat the fact that we're glowing about MJF's character into the ground at some point. In fact, I think I can see a hole already starting to form. But I don't think it works with every type of heel. You got to have a specific type of heel that it works. If you had other heels that are more flashy and everything like that, it may work once or twice. But the fact that MJF can prolong it as much as he does, because I don't think the match proper starts for a good 3 minutes until after the bell rings. But it works for him. And then it's funny because with it's something that like annoys the bejesus out of me when it comes to like Bullet Club in New Japan, like Jay White does this, Kenta does this, Evil does it. And really, I don't know, when those guys do it, it's not a good kind of this annoys me. It's just like, just bloody wrestle. But when MJF does it in this match, it works. And I think part of it is just the way that MJF jaw-jacks with the crowd, jaw-jacks with Cody a little bit. I don't know. It doesn't feel like he's just trying to annoy the fans in a meta way. It feels like it's part of the actual match. And as we said, MJF knows that he's outmatched. And so it makes sense that he doesn't want to immediately take Cody on like head on. He wants to come at it from an angle, so to speak. And this continues to sort of go on as I forgot how dominant Cody was early in this match. Like he's the one that gets all of the big offense. He gets a cutter when MJF finally rolls back in. MJF rolls up the ramp and then Cody takes this giant run down the ramp and does this huge clothesline to get him back in the ring. And the first two pieces of offense MJF gets in are a thumb to the eye and stomping Cody's broken toe. Like straight away, he's not trying to strike with him or get him in an arm hold. He's going for a thumb to the eye, which is never a nice thing to take, and then two straight for the broken toe. He's using his advantages. I mean, you've alluded to it multiple times. MJF knows he can't beat Cody, and you take a look, because I know Jim Ross and Excalibur and Tony Schiavone talk about Cody's actually did well as an amateur wrestler growing up and everything. So playing into everything, it makes sense. MJF's not going to try and out wrestle Cody because he knows he can't beat him that way. Instead, he knows about the injuries. He's going to take every advantage he can on the margins, almost like a baseball pitcher, knowing he can't throw over the heart of the plate. He's going to work on the margins, see if he can get something to work, see if he can get Cody to chase, if you will. But one thing I love, the fact that for a lot of grudge matches typically, or grudge matches, the trope tends to sometimes be, okay, these guys hate each other. Let's start with a lockup. They don't in this match. They let simmer, and when they finally do, it's fists are flying. They don't do that rest hold to start. They play off the importance that if you're in an actual fight, you're not going to be going for a headlock takeover with someone. You're going to want to beat the ever-loving crap out of someone. And they do that really well, apart from that clothesline spot, which just irks the living daylights out of me.
Oh, I like that one. But...
it's for show. It's for show. I get it.
The big run
from downtown. Like, it's coming. It's like, does it really? I get it's for show. Did it really? Okay. Cody, you have this one. I mean, you had your pyro earlier, but come on. Take it.
The next sort of big moment in the match, and it's the first one that involves outside stuff. So Brandy is outside, she throws a beer on Wardlow. Wardlow sort of follows her around, stalking her as if he's going to take some sort of revenge. Arn gets in the way, and Cody jumps down to intercept him with a huge suicide dive, which the crowd loves. He then stomps the crap out of Wardlow. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is one of the things that Cody gets criticism for is like what some call the smoke and mirrors of a Cody Rhodes match. Sort of the things that he does that aren't necessarily just the one-on-one match to generate generates an audience reaction. The critique is that it's some sort of like a shortcut almost. And this definitely is one of those tropes that would get labeled with that. Now, I know that you're someone who likes Cody, and you picked this match to do. So I wanted to hear what you think about that critique of a Cody Rhodes match.
I can see it. Kind of like with all of my sports, I have my certain favorites. Like my favorite wrestler of all time is Sting, and he had enough tropes to, in his matches to go on forever. I can understand why Cody gets these things, and I will say this, I normally don't mind it. That suicide dive almost took me out of the match just a little bit. I see why they did it, because you have this almost menagerie of people. You have Brandy, you have Arn, you have Wardlow, just staying outside the ring, essentially not really doing anything. So you almost had to invite them in somehow. And I know they get involved later on, but it's almost like and I don't know how true this is, it's almost like they said, okay, we've got to do something to, pop the crowd a little bit. So we're going to have this interference. Wardlow's never hitting Brandy or anything like that. We know that. But Cody's the hero. He's got, what's one thing heroes do? They save their spouses and everything like that. So boom, there you go. Plus it gives MJF some time to recoup. And he'd been taking quite a shellacking at that point. So I will say, for the purposes of that, really good kind of transitional moment and I normally don't mind the spots, but I can see where Cody does get that, to allude to one of his earlier WWF themes, you're only smoke and mirrors type of things.
Yeah, I'm kind of a bit torn on these, because as much as I kind of understand the idea that it's a one-on-one match, they're not sort of traditional wrestling moves or anything, but I feel like it's almost like something like this or something like blading. It's as equally a tool in a wrestler's arsenal to pull out as, say, a suplex. To say Kenny Omega, to put Kenny Omega as an option, as like, say, a dragon screw or a V trigger. Like, they're tools that he uses to get pops from the crowd. And Cody, he isn't as athletic. Let's just be honest. He's not as athletic as Kenny Omega in the ring. And so he relies on different tools that he is sort of honed and perfected and can insert at different points. And I think there's a craft to doing it. Like just like there's as Nick Gage, Nick Gage said on I listened to an interesting podcast with him and Chris Jericho a few months ago, and he was saying he hates watching some deathmatch wrestling because they're just hitting each other and there's no art to it. And that's a guy who his tools and the things that he uses are things like a pizza cutter, which, not most wrestlers don't use that, but they're the tools in his box, and he deploys them when he needs to, and he deploys them expertly. Just like I would say, like there is skill in how Cody deploys these things in his match. And I personally feel like they're sometimes overlooked and sometimes whiffed away without thinking about how the actual art behind putting a spot like this together and a moment like this together. We've got to keep going though, and there's a lot of back and forth between them. As we've said, MJF cheating his way, angling his way into competing in this match. A very cool moment that that stuck with me and that I'd forgotten about but was reminded of how good it was when I did my rewatch was when MJF finally grounds Cody and gets him in the salt of the earth, and then he eventually pulls the other arm away and eventually traps his legs, and forcing Cody to, as he goes to the ropes, normally a wrestler would put his foot on the ropes or grab the ropes with his free arm. He has to grab it with his teeth. And, he's not the first to do that, but I thought it was a really interesting and a really cool way to have MJF do something really brutal, but also give Cody something that, was a unique way for him to show his grit and his heart, that he's fighting with literally every fiber of his being and holding on to this match by literally the skin of his teeth.
Oh, definitely. I think MJF's been watching tapes of Zack Sabre Jr. in New Japan, because that was – I know he started off as Salt of the Earth, but it turned into like an omoplata, and then he took his right leg behind him almost like a bow and arrow. Like that, I'd expect to see something out of that, like out of ZSJ in the G1. It was amazing. But like you said, Cody grabs the rope literally by the skin of his teeth, and it sets up a great moment, great visual to progress the storytelling. This was an awesome story told in this match.
Yeah. And pretty soon afterwards, MJF rips Cody's boot off to expose the broken toe. And then afterwards, as they continue to fight, MJF actually gets busted open. Yeah, he bites the toe. And MJF gets busted open. At that point, both people have their target that they're going for. Cody has a toe that MJF is going to go for, and MJF has a forehead that's split open that Cody's going to go for, which I thought it was a simple and interesting setup. There was a funny moment, though, that I wanted to bring up, and I feel like it was really disjointed. It really took me out of the match. Cody sort of, at one point, throws up the Randy Orton pose and then puts MJF in for a draping DDT, that draping DDT that Orton does and that Michael Cole forever calls the vintage Orton. What did you think of this? Like, I don't know. This felt really weird to me, that where they inserted in the match and how it obviously Cody has a legacy of being influenced by Randy Orton, but I don't know. It just did not fit for me. Is that the same for you, or have you got some sort of defense of this little moment here?
I don't. This is where the whole Cody's the 3-star savior, credit Rich Plata. This is the whole, like you mentioned earlier, the smoke and mirrors routine.
Yeah, this is where it didn't work for me.
This is where, as much as I like Cody, as much as I like how his, how he's grown up and everything like that, this didn't need to be in the match. They were telling a fine enough story, and then, I'm less said about this, the better. Yeah. But yeah.
Leading up to the final bit, there's one particular spot I wanted to call out. There was this huge spot where MJF gets suplexed over the ropes, but holds onto Cody's neck, and Cody has to rip over after him, like whiplash over after him. that was a really cool spot, and I haven't seen it a whole lot before. I'm sure they're not the first people to do it, but I thought that was really well executed and looked really cool.
They did that. I cringed.
Yeah, it looked painful.
Remembering it. The fact that there's so much that could go wrong, they did really well setting up that spot, and then it plays really well into the finish of the match.
But, yeah, and in that sort of finishing stanza, they have a bit of a strike exchange that Cody gets the better of, but then MJF counters into the double cross, which is just him doing a crossroads. But then
beautiful.
As he grabs Cody's weight belt and goes to hit him with it, but Cody hits his own low blow as the ref is taking the weight belt off of MJF, and then a vertebraker for a big 2 count. And then Cody gets up and gives MJF a lash, which the referee allows. Interesting. I kind of understand it. Like, this guy's they're giving out so many lashes, and I love that the AEW referees have personality, and he's just like, yeah, whatever. Just don't go too far. But then of course MJF cowers in the corner, cries at Cody's feet. Just as Cody's thinking, oh, can I save this? Because of course he's a hopeless romantic who thought that he could mentor this person who he knew was a piece of crap. And in the moment where he hesitates, MJF spits at him in his face. Cody then takes that, hits 3 crossroads, but MJF counters as Cody goes for the final. Cody keeps going for punishment, gets carried away. MJF manages to counter, hits him with the dynamite diamond ring, which he'd put into his hand without the referee knowing, and gets the 3 count. What did you think of the ending of the match, Howard?
So the ending of the match was pretty well done, except for the dynamite diamond ring thing at the end. And it's not even the fact that it was how it was. There's a little bit of dubiousness in there, but I'll get to that in a second. Everything plays perfectly. Cody's hubris gets the better of him. And I think as a face, that's the one thing that you can say about Cody. He's, great, but if you get him fired up, there's a good chance you can beat him.
Temper.
Classic cliche, an angry fighter is a sloppy fighter. Sure enough, spits in the face. One of the worst things that a man can do to a man is spit in his face. And that riles Cody up, and you see it. 1 crossroad should have been enough, but he's got Cody incensed. So Cody picks him up for another one. When is enough, Cody? It's not enough. You could beat him right there, but no, he's got to go for that 3rd one, and MJF knows it. Hits a knee to the head coming off that, going for that 3rd one. And then that's where the dubiousness comes in, because you see referee Paul Turner just kind of look at Arn Anderson enough to where MJF reaches into his trunks, pulls out the dynamite diamond ring, socks Cody with it, shoves it in his trunk, theatrically kind of hits the ropes and falls down, and Paul Turner turns around. It's like, what the heck? Oh, well, 1, 2, 3. That's about the only criticism. The fact that they had to do such a comical... Why is Paul Turner looking at Arn? Arn's not going to be able to do anything. Come on, buddy.
Yeah.
If I had to give that particular segment like a rating, I'd probably rate it 4 3/4 stars out of 5. That dubiousness of Paul Turner having to turn around.
Yeah.
There's not much you can do to make that okay, because there's only so much staging that you can do there for it. But damn. But overall, perfect way in, because MJF, as you mentioned earlier, he gets busted open. He's got one of the better Crimson Mask faces, I think, and facials in that Crimson Mask.
Yeah, I talked about Blood and Guts a few weeks ago with Imp, and yeah.
Oh,
he
yeah.
Looks good. He looks good with some blood on his face, which is good because he's a heel. You want to see him with some blood on his face.
But also one thing they do, they don't overdo that trope. And everything. And I know that you look at stuff like performance art, and I'm not as big into that. Looking at through that lens, not as well versed in it. I'm working on it. But this is one of the more perfect examples of wrestling as a form of performance art. Because they pretty much hit all the right notes, except for kind of what we discussed, the Tope Suicida, the vintage Cody. And then
I actually thought the Tope part worked. Like for me,
Yeah,
that was a good example of it. The Orton part, man, that
the vintage Cody.
Yeah, that was weird. In this match particularly, I could imagine in other matches, but in this match, it did not make any sense to me.
Nope, you got a blood feud. But wait, I can understand MJF going for the heat seeker because that's part of his, him bouncing and doing the DDT off the rope. But not the draping DDT thing.
It's like
overall,
when Cody teased the pedigree everyone who listens knows this thing's pre-recorded. When he teased the pedigree a few weeks ago, but now months ago. Look, I told you that you had to avoid present stuff, and I'm the one that's here bringing it up, Howard. Real professional on my end.
We're excited about the product, so it can be forgiven.
Look, the question that I had, I guess, looking at this match in totality, as we've sort of said, is there's like a lot of good stuff going on here, but there's some disjointed parts. This is the question that first came to my mind when I thought of this match. Did this match live up to the build? Everyone who wrote about this match in the definitive match guide talked about the build, and the match did not get anywhere near as much of the verbiage. This match was not something that people talked about as a match of the year contender, but it was something they talked about as a feud of the year contender. Do you think this match lived up to the build?
I honestly, it was a good match on a great show, and it had an even better build. As much as I like this match, you almost set up, even though it was a prototype for what MJF would do kind of later on in his career, it didn't live up to it as much. I'd probably put the build at 5 stars and this match at like 3.5, 3 3/4.
Yeah.
When you do it that well, you're going to set a bar that's almost impossible to hit. So credit to them for doing what they did.
Yeah. See, I'm split on this because one thing I will defend is I think this match perfectly finished off the feud. In terms of particularly with the way they ended it, the way they set it up, the way they started it, the way they ended it. There was some disjointed bits in the middle of the match, and the match, I think, like athletically, maybe wasn't as what we wanted, and potentially didn't necessarily have quite like the fire that maybe the Jericho match had, which as I talked about with Miz Fan weeks ago now, but is like the perfect Cody Rhodes face match, and like almost a definitive. I'd agree with Miz Fan. That was Cody Rhodes' greatest performance. I feel like this is still the perfect ending to the actual feud they had story-wise and character-wise. It just didn't necessarily hit in the action stakes the way that we, that we maybe want some matches to hit. And I think that's one thing I'd like to emphasize, because this match, I think some people look at it as a flop a little bit, and I don't think it is the flop that people remember. It's not perfect, and I don't think either of us are saying that, but there's a lot going on character-wise and story in the actual match itself that I think make the match itself as good as the build, or at least the perfect ending to the build, a perfect encapsulation of the build.
So if this makes any sense, I think you can almost kind of separate, like, in terms of the build, it was 5-star build. The story that they told in the match, the story was 5 stars. The action itself to get, as they progress the story that moved the narrative along, may not have been the 5-star classic that we wanted it to be. Because they told a hell of a story. But the moves that they used to tell the story may not have been perfect.
Yeah. In terms of Cody's run in AEW, I think this and the Jericho feud are the pinnacle for him in AEW. I don't know if he'll ever get back to this point. I don't think he intends to, in many ways, in terms of the way that his run has gone. Where do you think this match and this program ranks for Cody?
So if it doesn't beat the Jericho feud, it's definitely a 1A. You could talk me into this being Cody's best feud.
Yeah.
So I will caveat you saying, he potentially doesn't want to hit that heights. They're doing a damn good job of telling a great story now, present day. But we'll save that for history to decide.
Yeah. History in the future. And of course, the TNT run into the Brody Lee stuff is incredible. Like, awesome bits of business. Actually, yeah, like, no, but I still think like the Jericho feud, and the performance in the Full Gear match, and then the build to this match. I don't know. For me, that's the pinnacle of Cody as a character in AEW so far.
Overall, yeah. Overall, best hero ever going to be right now. He was perfect as a hero there.
Yeah, for MJF, he's done a lot since this. As we talked about, he went into a feud. Well, he had a brief feud where he was with paired against Jungle Boy. They had an absolute banger at Double or Nothing in 2020. Then he went straight into a program with Mox for the championship, and then like a year-long program with Jericho where he didn't necessarily get the final win, but he ended up 3-1 up on Jericho. And then, he has gone a long way since then. But how do you think this match in particular affected MJF's overall trajectory?
Overall, I know I mentioned it earlier, this laid the groundwork for everything that MJF would become, because I think this match was Cody looking at someone who could be a future star in MJF and going, okay, let's sink or swim here, buddy. And I think MJF not only lived up to the hype, he exceeded it kind of. His character work was spot on as this Machiavellian heel, and it's only gotten better. I mean, you take a look, he infiltrated, over the course of his time in AEW, he infiltrated 2 factions in the Nightmare Family and then the Inner Circle.
Yeah.
And he somehow came out more dastardly coming out of each one than before, and doing it in 2 different ways. With Cody, he was this simpering, I'm just trying to get better kind of thing, but he's also got an attitude.
Yeah.
And in the feud with Jericho, which I know you've probably got a couple of podcasts to record potentially about that, he came in to the Inner Circle knowing who he was, but almost wanting to go to Jericho as a place of mentorship. And then he comes out looking even more dastardly than before, kind of pulling the wool over the eyes of this wizened veteran, which it's hard to believe that Jericho's been in the business for over 30 years. Jeez. But this lays the groundwork for everything that MJF has become, and it's done so well. There's nothing that's overly done about it. And that's weird to say in wrestling, because wrestling can sometimes jump the shark with things. He's had a good progression overall. And, I can't wait to see where MJF goes from here. He is a future star in this business.
He already is a star. He is already a star, yeah.
He's going to be a world champion in some promotion at some point. He's one of the, Jim Ross calls them blue chippers. And he's even said that in promo. I'm a blue chipper. He knows it, but he doesn't let the hype affect him, or at least right now on the surface. He doesn't let the hype affect him. So props to him. I can't wait to see where he goes next.
Yeah. No, look, I would just echo your words there. Like, this sets things up for MJF. This is the first major program he has in AEW. Like, for most people, this is the first major program he has that they've ever seen of him. For myself, I didn't watch MLW, so I didn't see him in that. So this was the first, as you said, this was like a sink or swim, and like he Ian Thorpe, Michael Phelps, this he just shot the lights out with this program and only went on to bigger and better things. So and this match is an absolute indelible part of the story of who MJF is and who he's going to be in the future. So. Yeah, look, as we said, this is something that is a major historic item for AEW. So I'm really glad we got to dive into it. Howard, did you have anything you'd like to add before we round things up today?
No, all I can say is, once again, thank you so much for having me on. It's been an honor and a privilege to be able to talk to another great fan of this great business. And once again, thanks to every person who contributed and everyone who's taking part in these podcasts. It's going to be fun kind of taking a look. I got my degree in advertising. I love figuring out the why of things. So I'm kind of interested to see different perspectives as to the why of how different people, because I know why I love most of these, but it's always fun getting different ones. And I can't wait to see how this podcast series progresses. So thank you.
And if people want to find you, where can they find you, Howard?
So my Twitter is at Howard_E_Shill. That's SCHILL. I know it's a long handle. I'm usually there. I love talking about WVU sports. I work for the Walt Disney Company, and so you'll see me on there talking about Disney and sports and wrestling. So yeah.
Yep. And I'll make sure that your Twitter handle is in the bio if people want to jump on there and follow you. As I said at the start, this is one of my favorite guys to talk about wrestling with. So I would highly recommend hitting the follow button for Howard. And yeah, look, thank you very much for being a part of this show, Howard. Thank you for dedicating some time to this. It's been a real pleasure to chat to you and to dig into this match. And thank you also to everyone for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. Come tell me why I was wrong about saying this match is better than people give it credit for. I'd be more than happy to have that conversation there. And make sure you join in next week for the podcast. Next week, we will be looking at Veni versus Emi Sakura from the Women's Elimination Tournament, and I'll be doing that with Sam Roberts. So make sure you tune in there and make sure you check out all of the great shows we have here on the Social Suplex Network. And you can also subscribe to this podcast on the podcast app of your choice. And why don't you write a review or tell a friend about it if you enjoyed it? I'd really appreciate it if you did. However, until next time, I will say goodbye and thank you very much for listening. I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to the AEW Match Guide podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then you can subscribe on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Also, feel free to let me know on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I'd love to hear from you. The AEW Match Guide podcast is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find many other fantastic podcasts discussing not just AEW, but all parts of the world of professional wrestling. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Sam Brown.